Hello, my friends. Welcome to me, your host, Christian Watson. So, my friends, I was recently thinking about something. I was thinking about how so many state governments, especially California and New York, over the course of the COVID-19 pandemic, saw it appropriate to restrict the freedom of association of many parishioners around their states. Um, and as I was thinking about this, I went back and did some research, and I just realized just how quickly governments overtook the social dominion of our country, of our communities, and tried to cede it to their own arbitrary ideas. Let me explain in a moment. So, for those of you who are not aware of what happened in California, California had had restricted immensely the ability of churchgoers to gather in their own churches. And of course, the Supreme Court, in response to several lawsuits, like the Center of American Liberty, struck this down. And the Supreme Court blatantly said that it was not correct for Gavin Newsom to do this. And of course, Gavin Newsom did not remove limits on churches due to his own epistemic righteousness or his own moral humility. I doubt he has either. He did it simply in response to force. So force is what closed the churches down, and force is what made the person who used force open them back up. We're going to get into this, the principled and philosophical significance of force as a mechanism of social remodeling, in a second. Then, of course, the Supreme Court also struck down New York's, and this is a few months before the California case, New York's restrictions. Because Cuomo put a restriction that limited churches, synagogues, and other houses of worship to 10 or 25 worshipers in hard-hit regions. Because, again, they violated the First Amendment's free exercise clause. And the majority opinion of the court said, even in a pandemic, the Constitution cannot be put away and forgotten. The restrictions at issue here, by effectively barring many from attending religious services, strike at the very heart of the First Amendment's guarantee of religious liberty. So, my friends, these incidences immediately make me think of the great Albert J. Jank. Those of you who are not aware of him, he was a writer back in the 1920s. He was one of the foremost leaders against the pretension of FDR and the New Deal, which really implemented government control in almost every sector of American life. It gave us the curse of sacred cows that many of our family members, like Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid, rely on, and which cannot be addressed efficiently, because if you address either of those in a manner that is about restricting or privatizing any of them, you will lose your place as a politician. He spoke out against the moral foundations of that idea before it even became a cultural sacred cow in America. But he also has a book called Our Enemy the State. In that book, he says, he poses this dichotomy between social power and state action. He says, and this is a pretty sensible point, it's a pretty, I think, common sense point. He says, the more government entrenches itself into social matters, the less people and communities in society have to do with those social matters. So, if you have a food pantry or a shelter, and the government comes in and says, you know what, we're going to provide welfare, we're going to provide housing for you guys, the food pantry and the shelter become almost obsolete, or their power and their impact is restricted because of the huge behemoth that just wandered in to that domain of social influence. If you have, I don't know, a government saying, you cannot smoke marijuana, the influence of a parent or the influence of a pastor to the person smoking marijuana who wants to counsel them or help them get away from that habit, their influence is restricted because you already have a government in there that will arrest them. In fact, many people, especially many people in the inner cities that I know anecdotally, are like, yeah, my son does drugs. I hope he'll get in jail and they'll straighten him out. These are the mental effects of the government coming in and restricting the ability of social action to handle things. Now, there are some appropriate uses of governmental force, but not as a means of intervening and providing anything to us, but as a means of keeping interference to happen in our own lives, as a means of ensuring that our rights to property and self-ownership are protected, of course. I'm not saying that society needs to direct everything. In fact, I think that a lot of incidences, a lot of deficiencies throughout history in American life and throughout the world have come from the passions, the brittle passions of social beliefs. And so I'm not saying that we need to completely bow down to society or community. That's not true. In fact, in many cases, the government has kept society from hurting people. Especially in the efforts to desegregate certain areas, desegregate certain schools in the South. There was the government who had military command to protect black kids who were trying to just go to school. So I'm not saying that, but what I'm saying is this. I'm saying in areas where the government is not essential, in areas where the government is not stipulated to be involved in those areas, in areas that have nothing to do with preventing interference in our private lives, the government has no legitimate cause in those areas, and their intervention in those areas is a restriction on social power, which limits our personal capacity to do things. Back to these churches being shut down. Americans, any individual knows their moral conscience and their spiritual belief system better than the government. And they know their habits and their desires better than the government. For the government to step in and say, you know what? You need to do X, Y, and Z, when in all reality, it's really an associative matter and it's not. I would argue that there are certain things that a parishioner could do to protect themselves from COVID. When the government just suspends your jurisdiction over that matter, the government is quite literally not just doing something that is statutorily bad, that is against the First Amendment. The government is making a statement of principle that it knows better than you do for your own life. But there's a broader issue going here, my friends. If America loses its communities, it's done. If the behemoth of the government continues to erode the foundations of voluntary social action, which have for many, many years been the cornerstone of American life, which have for many, many years animated the spirit of American both experimentation and exploration, whether it's to the push westward or whatever. If the government comes in and says, you know what, we're going to direct this or we're going to take over this, America is really on rough ground. And I'm not simply saying because America has always been driven by the actions of free individuals, it must be driven by that now. I'm saying as a part of the structure of America, free individuals are necessitated for our principles to keep going. So this is not simply an argument from history. This is an argument of necessity, of principled necessity. America needs the wills of free individuals to be uninhibited by unnecessary external influences. And this pandemic just showed that unnecessary external influences are ubiquitous, and they happen for a very particular reason. They happen because you have some bureaucrats who wield force and who have no issue trying to restructure the value system of the American experiment in the names of things that are supposed to help us, like public safety or whatever rhetorical tool they use to justify fundamentally immoral propositions. And of course, we see this, as I mentioned before, in many other areas with drugs, whatever. We have to keep a hold of our communities. We have to keep a hold of the social standing of individuals. We have to keep a hold of these things, my friends, because these things are essential to our republic. The republic does not succeed because the government made it succeed. The republic succeeds because, as the great philosopher Isabel Patterson said, the self-starters, the self-made people who deal with a lot of things, who venture out to start their own things, who try to manage households by themselves, who do everything they can against all the odds, they are the people. Adventurism, going into the unknown, staring into the unknown and going right for it. That is the story of America. But the government wants to restrict that creative spirit of America and simply make it about following things that they believe is best for you. Well, the creative spirit of America cannot be contained and America still live. It's either the creative spirit of America is uninhibited, or the creative spirit of Americans dies by force, and then America itself becomes a shell of its former self. I want to preserve this nation. I want to preserve the foundations of this nation. And that cannot happen in the face of interventionist government force. If we lose our communities, if we lose our social jurisdiction as individual Americans, we lose the country. So my friends, be sure to always be cognizant of these pushes. Petition, protest peacefully, do whatever you can, make videos like I'm making so you can shift the ideological dialogue away from nebulous phrases like public health and the common good, which really mean nothing on their own and are actually contradictions in terms, and towards a more concrete, foundational understanding of what it means, not just to be an American, but to inhabit one of the greatest superstructures that reinforces the truth of individual rights and the primacy of the individual in the history of this nation. Think on it. My friends, I love you guys so much. If you love me, patreon.com/officialcwatson or PayPal, officialcwatson@gmail.com, christianwatson.com, christianwatson.locals.com, and we have a Discord server you want to chat with me as well, which will be in the description down below. Guys, I love you so much, and please stay pensive. Bye, guys.